Good day, we are Group 3. For our consumer behavior research project, we have chosen to analyze the impact of scarcity, hoarding, and/or resource sharing during and after COVID-19. Throughout this presentation, we will be covering a general summary of the pandemic and what our research study is about, in addition to the methodology behind our research. Then we will go further in depth about our literature review, our results, and finally our conclusion and recommendations. The global pandemic known as COVID-19 has impacted countries worldwide and has influenced consumers' behavior and well-being. One of the most significant effects that have risen throughout and before COVID-19 are the levels of scarcity, hoarding, and resource sharing during and after the pandemic. This research study aims to discover the shortages of PPE supplies, how the businesses will differentiate their sales approach, and how the media has influenced scarcity and hoarding ideas. The methods and approaches used are secondary data from books, articles, and letters from business journals. The study also uses quantitative research, where data can be statistically analyzed, which is achieved through anonymous online surveys. Now I'd like to begin the analysis of our literature review and the results that we found. Our first research question was, how has the pandemic created shortages in PPE supplies? We used publications such as journals, articles, and research letters to understand how these shortages have affected surgeons, healthcare workers, and finally how it has affected the third party, those receiving surgery, and those affected the most during the pandemic. The literature revealed that more guidelines and procedures should be put in place to ensure the safety of healthcare workers and their patients. Also, hospitals and governments may not have accounted for personalized fits of PPE supplies ahead of time and left individuals scrambling to buy whatever was available. The research was unequivocal that most individuals, specifically those working with or close to healthcare, struggle with their mental health and a sense of safety. Well, those are the results from our literature review. Our anonymous survey found that though individuals' purchasing priorities have changed, only some struggled with PPE shortages. In addition to this, our study found that most individuals felt anxious, stressed, and nervous at the beginning of the pandemic. These attributes were in accordance with some of the literature review findings. However, the majority said that now they are not concerned or as nervous as they were before. Therefore, though there were apparent shortages in PPE at the beginning, individuals feel safe about the protocols put in place now. I will now pass it over to Alex to discuss our second research question.
Next, I will be discussing our literature review findings and a results and analysis for the research question: what would businesses do differently with their sales approach in the future? The first article analyzed aims to highlight consumers' behaviors during the pandemic when it comes to the product consumption and hoarding. Additionally, the articles outline many business models and plans that may be used to regulate the large spike in demand. Essentially, businesses are remodeling their supply chains to meet the high demands for essential goods. Companies are integrating several safety protocols to alleviate panic buying. To continue, the next three articles analyze the supply chain and how it has affected businesses. These articles state that weak supply chains affect the transfer of goods and prohibit supplies from meeting the high demand levels. It's essential that business keep strong relationship with their suppliers to help keep up with the strong demand of the products. Because of the vast effect in supply chain, many grocery stores are having to put limits on their meat purchasing. Due to several meat plant closures in the early months of the pandemic, it has affected many big corporations such as Costco and leads to why they are putting limits onto their meat purchasing. Limits allow for grocery stores to compete with high demands and give all consumers an equal in product consumption. The last article covered highlights the importance of food insecurity and how COVID-19 has affected many families. Already, product consumption is problematic for low income families, and many rely on the Supplement Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. With consumers panic buying, it makes it even difficult for families to find products they need. Limiting products and restricting hours is the business's plan to reduce product hoarding and allow all consumers to have an equal chance of buying essential goods. Now onto my survey. Over 2 weeks, I received 19 responses, most being female, age ranging from 21 to 30, and being a college or university student. To update one business sales approach, marketers need to understand their consumers financially, mentally, and physically, and which can be seen through our survey. Around 42.1% responded that they were affected financially. One of my respondents is a small business owner, and being closed for the first 3 months said she stated that had a big effect on her business. Having to follow all of these new COVID regulations with cleaning, she had found it very hard to find cleaning supplies to help operate her business. With that being said, due to the shortage in supplies, businesses are having to increase prices on essential goods, such as cleaning products, which makes it harder for us as consumers to buy. 84.2% of my respondents stated that the pandemic has affected their purchase priority, with PPE and cleaning supplies being their main priority. Most of my respondents said they already noticed that businesses are putting limits onto products and believe that is essential for product hoarding when it comes to the second phase of this pandemic. To summarize, all of the literature articles and the survey do a great job answering and analyzing the research question. Producer, marketers, and consumers realize how uncertain product consumption can be during the second phase. Businesses are implementing many new approaches to help with the product shortages. As consumers, we must be kind to one another. Everyone deserves a chance to essential goods, but at the end of the day, demand is higher than supply. I now will be passing it off to Jana as she discusses our research question number 3.
All right, so moving on to question 3, how did the media pave the way for scarcity and hoarding during the pandemic? Most of the journal articles in the literature review regarding this specific research question had similar findings. Consumers react based on their perception of personal risk, and that can either be increased or decreased based on their consumption of media and information regarding the pandemic. And also, people tend to act according to the actions of others, and they follow typically the same themes as what their social groups are doing. Um, People also act in their own self interest and use strategies like hoarding or stockpiling to reduce personal risk as a coping mechanism. Um, the research also found that though the media does have an influence on whether people are going to stockpile or hoard, it's not always their driving factor. Consumers don't always participate in this phenomenon due to media coverage. Um, in regards to the survey that we created in order to research further this question, the results were really this like very similar to what was found in the literature review. Our survey found that across several income levels, genders, social circles, and geographic areas, news coverage of the pandemic influenced by our behavior, driving people to stockpile products like toilet paper, canned goods, and disinfectant. Though some respondents did indicate that news coverage was not the only factor influencing their decisions. Respondents also indicated that they were more likely to trust information from traditional news sources like television or newspaper, as opposed to social media sources.
Reassuring the public that there are necessary procedures and supplies put in place at perceived COVID-19 hotspots we believe will reduce panic buying. Our study found 68.6% of individuals responded saying they did not panic buy, and the literature review supports this as people felt there were enough procedures and protocols put in place at hospitals to ensure safety, and those who had preconceived anxieties had their fears quelled once they realized the effectiveness of said procedures. 48.6% of respondents, however, believe that there was not enough PPE supply. So, education for these people is key in helping them realize that panic buying does more harm than good for society. Policy changes on an organizational scale, specifically within hospitals, are key. Routine measurements of frontline workers' hands and face size is essential, as improperly fitting supplies does more harm than good. On a governmental scale, the federal and provincial governments need to enforce harsher penalties for those reselling PPE. Although the Ontario government has highlighted penalties on its website, the enforcement is another story. If you check Kijiji searching N95, you'll see several listings of N95 respirators at massively inflated prices. Stiffer penalties that are enforced should eliminate this. Lastly, we need to take a more proactive approach in terms of supplying our own equipment, as many ventilators, for example, were purchased from international suppliers rather than from Canadians.
In order to ensure that essential goods are being distributed efficiently, businesses should obtain their goods from local suppliers. Local suppliers are efficient sources for goods as they are not dependent on foreign policies and regulations. Though international suppliers have their benefits, the pandemic has exposed how susceptible they are to import disruptions and foreign export regulations. Businesses should also look to strengthen their supply chain by manufacturing their own goods. In doing so, supply chains will no longer be dependent on foreign inputs to deliver goods to consumers. Additionally, businesses that offer essential goods should develop e-commerce platforms. The e-commerce platforms should outline product availability and offer delivery services as well. E-commerce platforms will enable consumers to obtain goods from a variety of sources and will provide them with a safe method of shopping. In addition, with a platform that outlines product availability, consumers will be less stressed and prone to panic buying. Both e-commerce platforms and storefronts should also continue to place purchase limits. As the data suggests, many consumers find that limits need to be established to stop hoarding and panic buying. In the end, limits will aid all consumers to have access to essential goods.
With all of the research and articles taken into account, it is evident that the media largely influence consumer behavior to encourage hoarding. As there is much uncertainty in the world, people turn to credible sources for information and guidance, which is why it is so important to be mindful when publishing on any media. There are three distinct recommendations that we have constructed for all influential media entities to reduce fear and hoarding the next time the world begins to panic. The first recommendation is for the media to promote and encourage others to help those around them. This pandemic has not been easy for everybody, and having people stand together and helping one another will alleviate stress during this situation. It is very important for people to be inspired to lend a helping hand to those around them, and this can be achieved through the media reinforcing this theme. The second recommendation is for the media to recognize the impact that their words can have on others and for them to give a second thought about the information being released. As proven, misinformation is harmful to all involved and is a guaranteed way to get people to panic and lose trust in others. The third and final recommendation for the media would be to choose phrasing more carefully when broadcasting to the masses. Most advice released to viewers was phrased as, "you should be doing this," and this phrasing is perfect for enforcing new laws and regulations. However, for recommendations, phrasing sentences this way employs a sense of urgency and causes people to panic. Media outlets should phrase advice as, "it is important to keep in mind that," because it keeps viewers aware of the information while feeling no pressure to act on their end. To conclude, it is important for businesses, the media, and individuals to reflect on one's actions when this pandemic started in order to prevent harmful consumer behavior in the future. Through thoroughly exploring the three research questions previously stated, it is evident that hoarding was caused mostly by panic buying. Taking extra measures to ensure that the amount of public fear is reduced, especially during a stressful situation, is essential to maintain public health and keep the world moving. Thank you for listening.